discuss in our new essay just published, Happy Customers Are Always Right. This is an essay that attempts to do two things. One is identify real investment ideas that we believe are important and relevant for wealth creation, and then also critically analyze so-called investment ideas which are being touted by Wall Street firms and investment companies and so on and so forth. We're focusing on one specific deck here. It was published by ARK Invest, Big Ideas 2023. This is by no means an attempt to criticize them personally. This is a general overview over ideas. We just use their ideas because I think they're a good summary of what's floating around Wall Street, and actually a good example of why we believe that these so-called ideas are often just very entertaining narratives, which are fine. They're set goalposts, they give you inspiration, but the danger is they're misleading. People might think that there's money-making opportunity here, when in fact often it's really just storytelling. And I think the purpose, the second purpose of this particular episode is to highlight that. So the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So it's really important for people to understand where they stand relative to, let's say, the narrative that is going around on Wall Street when you have ideas like digital wallets and AI and precision therapies and all that stuff. It's useful to take these things as they are, which is narratives, and then maybe also think about it a little bit. Think about it a little bit more deeper. What does it actually mean? Where do I stand? What are the companies that we think could be benefiting from all of this? Now, our conclusion fundamentally here is we come up with two really good investment ideas because we believe that they have legs, and both of them are centered around what we call happy customers. Hence the title, Happy Customers Are Always Right. In a nutshell, what we're trying to say here is that, look, the world of investing is complicated enough. It's very convoluted. There's lots of stories, lots of narratives going around. People are taking advantage of this sometimes by touting narratives as ideas. There's lots of marketing, it's a big gibberish. And what we need to understand as investors is, okay, what does actually make money? And what we're saying here is that happy customers, iterating around happy customers, that's your signpost. That's your North Star. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's February 13th, 2023. This is Krim Delgo. For the day, the fund is down 2.1%. The market is up 1%. For the year, we are up 60.2%. The market is up 7.4%. We're outperforming by 52.8%. We're introducing our just recently published essay, Happy Customers Are Always Right, which is a critical analysis of big ideas that are touted on Wall Street. It is a critique on the concept of ideas in the investment community, which is always used in many times, often as misleading narratives, because what we're saying here is that ideas are very important. So we're going to talk about this. We're also coming up with two really good ideas that we believe will make money. And we're also going through a bunch of ideas and critically analyze them in the sense that we're not saying they're wrong. It's often, I think it's human nature to try to criticize ideas. It's something that we do almost by definition because, and this goes back to Darwin and natural selection, because natural selection tries to keep things in order the way they are. We're actually against new things. So whenever a new idea comes to fruition, we try to be negative about it or try to criticize, which is a good thing, actually. That's kind of what Karl Popper has been saying about ideas. So it's a good thing, but we also have to be careful not to miss out on the gold nuggets. But let's first talk about what we actually mean with ideas. This is important. It's a little bit epistemological, it's a bit philosophical, but it's still important. So what we consider an idea is a creatively evolved process of thinking, a thought, an opinion. It's a structure that helps us understand the world, that helps us interact with the world. So ideas are, we say that in the essay, that natural selection is basically ideas. So when we talk about the evolution of natural selection, by natural selection through, let's say, mutation, a genomic mutation is just another idea of how to deal with the environment. It might happen serendipitously, or I don't know if that's a word, but it might happen randomly through serendipity, or it might happen because there is a big designer somewhere doing that. I don't know. That's not the point here. But what I'm saying is that the idea of gravity, or the idea of let's say, the idea that Tesla is the main driver of electric vehicles and that there's no such thing as an electric vehicle industry, which is proliferating itself. It is actually only Tesla, which happened to be one of our investment ideas. I'm going to elaborate this more carefully a bit later. But I just want to say those are important thought constructs that help us navigate through the world. And if we're right, and the way we know if we're right, then we will proliferate and evolve and as an organism or as an entity, as a company. And if we're wrong, we will not. Then the idea is wrong, and it will not proliferate, and it will be deemed, not worthy surviving. However, what's important here is that every idea has to be tested against nature or against some sort of ground truth. And this is the key. This is Karl Popper at his best. And we believe that one of the big problems with all this big idea talk on Wall Street is that they're exactly trying to avoid that. And this is the key. So if you have somebody that talks about big ideas, but then doesn't immediately bring in some sort of validation mechanism, then you probably already know this is snake oil or this is marketing. Okay, so this is one big takeaway of this essay, that you need validation is oxygen for ideas, it's oxygen for entrepreneurs, it's oxygen for anything. We spoke about this in the Nick Lane discussion of the book, The Vital Question. It is absolutely paramount to have something, whatever that may be, that validates your idea. Otherwise, the idea is not worth it. So this is really important. That's why the title, Happy Customers Are Always Right. Happy customers are the validation mechanism for money-making processes. So this is key. We talk about ideas also in the context of creativity, and that's a David Deutsch concept. Creativity, let's say, it's not clear what it is. We know how it feels. It's when something new happens. Creativity, again, happens in the natural selection process when mutations happen on the genomic side. They happen when, Leonardo da Vinci paints stuff. They happen when Jackson Pollock paints, and so on and so forth. Creativity is really when something happens that maybe when something comes out of nothing, when something comes out of, I shouldn't say nothing. We spoke about this also at length, that very often new things come out of things that were there before, but they maybe are used a little bit differently. We spoke about that sort of half fish, half land animal that went from water to land, and that was a creative process that enabled the domestication of land and the proliferation of living species on land. So this is one example of the evolution of by natural selection, where creativity was happening. And it certainly is not coming up with something out of nothing, but it sometimes feels a bit like that. Most importantly, creativity is civilization is when you add creativity to the selection of ideas. This is one of the big takeaways in the beginning of the essay when we talk about what ideas are. The interpretation of Deutsch and Popper is that ideas are not just similar to natural selection, they are natural selection. So it's really important, and we're starting the essay with this epistemological discussion of ideas because we want to really nail it down. What is an idea? And it's a very important thing, and ideas can help you make money. But again, most of what people consider to be ideas, or tout to be ideas on Wall Street, they're not ideas, they're just narratives. This is very important. So let's talk about those ideas that are being touted. And we're using ARK Invest's 2023 Big Ideas deck. Again, it's not to pick on them. A lot of other investment firms use similar ideas and so on and so forth. So this is just for simplicity. And we do actually appreciate this deck a lot. It was the inspiration for this essay and this podcast. So clearly we took it very seriously, and we think it's a very inspirational and an interesting exercise to go through it, think about it, and then criticize, analyze it, and find also the good stuff in it, and also point out all the misleading stuff that could be dangerous. So one of the first ideas they tout is technological convergence. And this is a good example of, I think, a misleading narrative. Technological convergence, so you have, let's say, AI, and you have blockchain technology, and you have 3D printing, and so on and so forth. They're listing a couple of technologies that are converging, and it's going to lead to rapid iteration and rapid this and rapid that, and so on and so forth. The key is this. Look, technology is always converging. There's no such thing. Like when we were in the 19th century, we had metallurgical innovation, we had steel innovation, we have the railway, we have bridge building innovation, architectural innovation. You could have made the same argument. So it's not like technology, that's what technologies do. I mean, there's no such thing as a completely isolated technology. In fact, that's a good way to analyze, let's say, if we go back to our essay about fusion is illusion, maybe nuclear fusion is not really a technology because it's not converging with anything. It's just some sort of what they call moonshot or something out there that, in our opinion, has no legs anyway. So I think technologies need to be converging in order for them to even be relevant. And that's, we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the vertical integration of value chains. Because that's kind of related to this concept. But what we're saying here in this first concept of technological convergence is it's a tautological statement. That's what we're saying here. And again, it's a nice narrative, but don't take it as a money-making opportunity. Next idea, or so-called idea, AI will increase productivity. For some reason, that's a great thing. Well, yes, it's a great thing, but it will not increase competitiveness, and it will certainly not help you make money. You as an investor, because it's a bit like when Microsoft came out with Excel and Word. Well, that increased productivity of knowledge workers, but it didn't increase the competitiveness of companies. So any company which is using AI today is going to go around with slides and saying, we're this, we're that. Well, it's good, and you have to keep up with all that, but it's not going to make you competitive because everybody else is using it. Digital wallets are disintermediating the banking system. Now, this has legs. There's certainly an interesting concept here to be discussed because we have a lower cost version of, let's say, banking, whatever that may be, transfers of money and that kind of stuff. The question here, of course, is, are digital wallets like online trading or online travel agencies, when they came up in the 90s, they're a good thing, but quite frankly, not a big money-making opportunity. I mean, it's okay. You could have bought Charles Schwab, made a good return. Yeah, I'm not against all of that. I'm just saying, is this really such a big idea, or is it just sort of an incremental development of technology? I think we want to handicap that. Web3. Web3 is a big deal. We think that really is a big deal. However, again, we have to be very careful when we talk about these things in the investment context. Web3, the way we see Web3, it's the Internet of Identity. It is a new way of interacting with people, meaning it's a new way of societal economic interaction. Voluntary exchange can happen in new ways. We compare Web3 with what happened in the early Renaissance. And by the way, this is also related to smart contracts and things like along those lines. What we're saying here is that we have a new way of interacting on a societal level because we have algorithmic contracts. And this is very similar to what happened in the early Renaissance when contract law and accounting practices were renewed or introduced into European society, particularly in city-states like Florence and Venice and also Antwerp. So the big trading hubs, they had a problem. They had a problem which was, how do you organize trade around the existing institutional infrastructure, which was, monarchs and feudalists and the church and all of that stuff. So they had to come up with new ideas, and one of them was to introduce contract law and accounting, which wasn't new, of course. Everything was redeveloped. Everything evolved from the old times. The Babylonians had money, Romans had their law. So there was a lot of stuff thousands of years before these city-states came to fruition, but the people reappropriated all of these ideas for their purpose. And this is the key here with Web3. We see a similar development of a sort of a new societal, let's say, way of interacting, which is very interesting. However, what we don't see is necessarily the problem that's being solved. So this is a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. But to be fair, it doesn't always have to be like that. So Web 1 and Web 2, they both had their own ways of interaction and new ways of commerce. Because here's the big question is this, okay? Let's say if we take the early Renaissance. The early Renaissance, new law practices were developed which allowed for new types of trades. For example, shipping goods around Europe or even into other continents necessitated a different type of legal structure than, let's say, the local lord or feudalist who just decides whatever is and what isn't. So that legal structure was a solution to a particular problem in commerce, which then allowed for faster proliferation of commerce. And then the legal structure again had to be adapted to the faster proliferation. So there was a cross-pollination of institutional framework and actual commerce. Do we have the same development here? I think yes. The answer is we have to expect that Web3 will allow for new types of commerce, and then new types of commerce will evolve Web3. The problem, of course, here is what are the happy customers of Web3? This is, of course, the big question. That's why we don't want to be too excited about it. It's a bit dangerous to jump into a narrative like this and then invest left and right. What we'd like to see is happy customers. This is a very good example. Web3 is a very, very good example of where happy customers matter as a signpost for, okay, there's some money making here. And I think right now what people are saying is, let's say, gaming, NFTs. We're not sure about that. That's just, it's kind of a, let's say, you're pulling yourself out of your own hair kind of thing. The next big idea here is Bitcoin as money. I think we agree with that. We've spoken about this before. I think the one innovation that Bitcoin has where we see happy customers is in the application of Bitcoin as money. Importantly, though, let's be very clear here. If Bitcoin is not an inflation hedge, because inflation is not a monetary phenomenon. Inflation is a societal, political, economic phenomenon. Inflation is driven by, it doesn't matter what money you have. You always will have or will not have inflation. Now, money can accelerate it if we are all stuck with Venezuelan, whatever, bolivars, and that's our legal tender, and so on and so forth. We will have to readjust our lifestyles because that money can become worthless through money printing. But inflation per se is not measured in money, it's measured in time it takes to afford something, and that is independent of money. We believe that Milton Friedman and Keynes have misled the economic profession for over 100 years now. It's enough. We should stop and really think about inflation as a political construct. For example, if we have immigration in California, what we need is zoning laws, we need labor laws, we need all of that stuff to adapt to the immigration in order to mitigate inflation. The dollar or Bitcoin or anything like that is not going to make a difference. So this is very important. And again, I think misleading by almost anybody who is touting Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not a hedge for inflation. Bitcoin is a hedge for the dollar. Very, very important. Now, let's talk about one of the big developments recently. This is now not from ARC. This is a development which was generative search and the announcement of Microsoft last week that they're going to incorporate generative search in Bing and their browser. We believe that that is one of the big investment ideas for the foreseeable future, which is the Copilot technology, the GPT technology allows, and Microsoft can use it in their actually in their software development tools, particularly GitHub Copilot, but any kind of software development in the future will be guided by GPT type technology. And that to us is a real creatively evolved thought. In other words, it's an idea, it's a money-making idea because it has happy customers to iterate around. Let's get back to the ARC deck. So precision therapies is one of the ideas that they tell. We feel that that's a kind of that's feel-good talk. And the reason it's feel-good talk is that it sounds very, very interesting. However, the problem with biotech and biomedicine is that you can't iterate around happy customers. You don't even know who the customer is. And very often the FDA is the barrier to do real fast iteration. We don't say the FDA is bad or anything like that. We're not propagating no regulation whatsoever. But what we're saying is that the way the healthcare, the public health in industrial complex is structured right now, it's just very difficult to iterate on happy customers, and therefore we don't see Moore's law type development. That is just a statement. We don't have any solutions per se. We actually are invested in some biomedicine companies because the potential is still massive. We could have, DNA or RNA editing, or we could have even protein adjustment. I'm not sure if you can edit proteins at this point. And then we have AlphaFold. So we have this whole closed circle, closed loop from DNA, RNA to protein and then back. So we can go back and forth. We can do much faster research. So we can iterate really fast maybe in the early stages of drug development. Unfortunately, the last stage where we actually go to the patient, that is very highly regulated, and therefore fast iteration is difficult. Molecular cancer diagnostics is another great idea. I think it's feel-good talk. The interesting thought here is the following. So in a nutshell, what is molecular cancer diagnostic? It is that you try to find ctDNA in your bloodstream. For example, this is just one example. ctDNA is circulating tumor DNA. So it's basically fragments of a tumor in form of circulating DNA that is, circulating in your bloodstream. And with that, you could detect that there's a tumor somewhere. So you could have sort of this early indication and then go from there. Early indication, early detection of tumors is one of the best ways to heal cancer or tumors. So therefore, we believe that that is, again, it's feel-good talk, because first and foremost, who is the happy customer here? Diagnostics are an inherently terrible business model. We are talking about this in the essay, just real quick. I mean, if you prevent illnesses, the current system, the current public health industrial complex is not set up for that, because what they want is patients to be treated for millions of dollars. If you come to the hospital and they detect early cancer and then solve it, and maybe you can make them $100,000, versus imagine if you don't do that and then you go through the whole process like today and it costs $2 million. You will decrease the revenue, you will decrease GDP growth even. So the whole incentive structure, the whole revenue structure, everything is completely misaligned. And that's what, biomedicine in general is suffering from. So we're discussing this. Again, we don't have a solution, but it's important to notice that when we see big ideas like molecular diagnostics, those are the big questions that we need to ask the entrepreneurs that are in this space. The next, this is now EVs and EV adoption. This is an investment idea, our own investment idea, and the idea is the following. There's no such thing as EV adoption. There's only adoption of Teslas. Why? Because Tesla is vertically integrated, building the whole value chain for EVs, and there is without Tesla, there wouldn't be any EV adoption anyway, because EVs are not like semiconductors. There is no Moore's law in EVs. And this is a very interesting point. When Jordan Moore formulated Moore's law, everybody was aware of this because it was inherent, it was innate in the process of semiconductor manufacturing that you have this, whatever Moore's law is. That is not the case with EVs. EVs require a complete revamp of the supply chain, from the mining all the way to the car, the battery, the charging technology, the powertrain, the UX, the software of the car, even the aftermarket, the service, the sales channels. Everything has to be revamped. Even the people that are hired by Tesla technically should be educated in a different way, because the problem set is so different than what traditional car companies are facing, or even traditional software companies. So what we're saying here is that unless you have an entrepreneurial, the kind of entrepreneurial ingenuity and grit and creativity that Tesla is bringing to the table, you will not have EV adoption. So this is a very subtle distinction, but we think it's very important. You hear that a lot, EV adoption, EV adoption. There's no such thing as EV adoption. There's only Tesla adoption. Now the others are sort of piggybacking on that gravy train. In fact, it's not a gravy train because most of them are losing money. They have to, they don't have a choice. We believe that the EV space will be very, very much like Amazon and AWS. There will be maybe one, maybe two players, and with AWS, it's a very unique situation. The fact that Azure is able to compete is just simply because Microsoft is a very large software development platform anyway. Google is not competing very successfully, and we don't see any future for them yet. I mean, maybe that will change, but for 10 years they had, Google Cloud, and they're still not making any money. And then we have the iPhone also, another good example. There was no such thing as mobile technology proliferation. There was only Apple and its relentless iteration around happy customers, around the iPhone and the mobile technology that enabled what we call mobile technology today. So we see EVs very much in that same realm, at a much bigger scale, a much wider type of supply chain problems that need to be solved. That's, by the way, the reason why Tesla is solving all these problems. They're not doing it just for fun. They're doing it because there's no other way. This is very important. It's a very important distinction. The next idea is the robo-taxi, which is adjacent to the Tesla story. What we're saying here is the following. The robo-taxi might be a good idea, but it's a robo-butler that really matters. The robo-butler. I want to have my own robot that does things for me. This is it's just the way we see this is the following. Like the question of should we own a car or not is, in our view, at least for now, it's answered. I want to own my car, but I want my car to do stuff for me, pick my kid up, take me somewhere, pick up my wife, bring me back, go pick up my groceries. So that's why we call it the robo-butler. The big important insight here is the following, that when you talk about the robot in general, there's this robot, whatever we call full self-drive car robot, what is the company, the successful company, going to iterate around? It's three. When it comes to transportation, you always have three vectors iterating around. The vectors are cost per mile, time, and comfort. And what we're saying is that actually cost per mile is not so important. Yes, it's a matter, it's a factor, but what really matters is comfort and time. Just take an example. If I told you you can ride a horse from San Francisco to New York at 5 cents per mile, or you can do the same trip in a Tesla for 50 cents per mile, which one would you use? So clearly time is much, much more important than cost at some point. Of course, when we're talking about thousands of dollars per mile, then cost makes a difference. But the point here is that we really have time and comfort. And we see Tesla very well positioned here because they're working on the time vector on several fronts. One is their time can be, of course, the time it takes to get from A to B, but time can also be, it takes you 3 hours to go from here to Tahoe, and in that same amount of time you could work or sleep or play. Therefore, you can save time. So Tesla's definitely working on that front. We believe that people in the future, when they buy these robo-butlers, they will be much more interested in entertainment options or work options or leisure options, and not so much on cost. If it's 40 cents or 30 cents per mile, that's not going to make such a big difference. People already pay dollars, $5, $6 sometimes just to take a fast lane on a highway. So time is really important, and comfort, of course, is also very critical. The last idea that we discuss is the orbital aerospace. And that is really another SpaceX story, very similar to the EV story. There's no such thing as proliferation of orbital aerospace. There's SpaceX and the relentless innovation around happy customers that is happening there. There will be others maybe piggybacking on it, but right now there's SpaceX, reusable rockets, low orbit satellites a la Starlink as the first sort of milestones. We don't know where else this is going. Of course, we know that he wants to go to Mars and all of that. But the point here is that we iterate on happy customers, and when it comes to orbital aerospace, it's again iteration around several parts of the value chain, and there's no Moore's law of orbital aerospace. There is just SpaceX relentlessly innovating. So to summarize, we discuss our essay about big ideas that we critically analyze, and we actually say that most of these so-called big ideas are not big ideas, they're just stories. There's two big ideas, though, that we are happy to take away from us, to take with us. One is the idea that there's no such thing as EV adoption. There's only the adoption of Teslas, because it takes a relentless iteration around several parts of the value chain to make an industry like this happen. And second, Microsoft will be the beneficiary of GPT technology through Copilot technology in their software development toolkit. And both of these companies have one thing in common, which is the key ingredient for moneymakers, which is they are able to iterate around happy customers. Thank you.